Welcome back to the Play by Play Podcast YouTube channel, where yesterday we about concluded week 3 of the NFL regular season. Of course, we still have what is probably going to be a big time matchup tonight, a potential Super Bowl highlight matchup tonight between the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens. Starts about 2 hours from the time that I'm recording this at 6:15. Should be a banger of a Monday night football game. But we have virtually concluded week 3 of the NFL regular season. And don't get me wrong, I do think that we are still very, very early within the season. Obviously, we still have 14 weeks to go. But I also think that these weeks are very telling of the direction that the league is going in. And it really does highlight and shows what position certain teams are in as well. I mean, I think that you can still get a lot despite it being very, very early from these first 3 weeks. Of course, there are nagging injuries that are happening. There are some potential red flags and potential green flags on certain teams here and there that you can go ahead and highlight. Of course, the overall order of these teams are potentially going to be different, 14, 15 weeks down the road when we finally get the playoff set. But it definitely does start the early strokes overall. And today, I want to fully review it. We're going to get into a couple of specific teams as well as also highlight a couple of things that I just saw over the weekend. But before we get into this, let's go ahead and finish off this very long intro by encouraging you guys to go down below, subscribe, leave a like on the video, comment, share with your friends, and if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. We're on all those social medias. You'll get to see my latest reaction to breaking news within the NBA and the NFL and combat sports as well, and you'll never miss for whenever the podcast sets to upload an episode. Without further ado, guys, let me not waste any more time. Let's get into week 3 of the NFL regular season. So I want to start at the top of the order with the first game that kicked off for me, and one game that I was super zoned in on, and that was Vikings versus Bengals. A matchup that definitely wasn't the most prestigious, especially because of the quarterback play. J.J. McCarthy dealing with an ankle injury. He was out, replaced by Carson Wentz. And then, of course, you had Jake Browning filling in for Joe Burrow after he had surgery on his toe when he was dealing with turf toe. So, obviously, it wasn't a big-time highlight matchup, but I mostly watched it to see how the Bengals would look following this injury. I mean, they're going to be without Burrow for a majority of the rest of the season, for the next 2 to potentially even 4 months. And they're going to have to stick with Jake Browning by their side as their starting quarterback. And I really, really wanted to see how they would look. And to say that they got an ass whooping, to say that they got demolished, I think would be a big-time understatement. I mean, they got absolutely dominated by the Minnesota Vikings 48-10. And a couple of those, I do agree, were a couple of comedic mistakes. One of the most highlighted ones that I remember was Noah Fant just getting randomly stripped in the middle of the field of the ball by a couple of Vikings defenders and returning it all the way back for a touchdown. That was interesting. But to be honest, when looking at Jake Browning, he didn't necessarily play terrible. I mean, he did have 2 interceptions, which were big on his part and led to a lot of the offensive opportunities that came from the Vikings. But he went 19 for 27 on the day and scored a touchdown, 140 yards. So, he wasn't slinging the ball and getting big-time yardage down the field, which you definitely would like to see, especially when it comes to having personnel like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. But I didn't think that he had a really, really terrible day. One of the things that was terrible for the Bengals overall was their rushing game. Their leading rusher on the day was Samaje Perine with 21 yards off of 4 carries. Chase Brown, who's supposed to be their lead running back this year, 10 carries for 3 yards, not even averaging a full yard per carry, which was very, very problematic in them. And like we've talked about so many times on this channel, when you do not have that running game included in your offense, it just makes your offense so much more one-dimensional and so much more predictable, and that is what's happening. And not just the run game, but also just the Joe Burrow injury in general kind of highlights, I think, where we are at right now with the Cincinnati Bengals. Because offensively, they're great in terms of their weapons, right? They have incredible weapons. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They did lose Tyler Boyd, but Chase Brown was actually a very suitable starting running back last year for them. And I actually think that Noah Fant could be a pretty good plug-in tight end for them to replace what they had with C.J. Uzomah a couple of years back when they visited the Super Bowl against the Rams. But the big central part to this team is going to come down to the offensive line. They just have not been willing to invest into their offensive line like other franchises had. I mean, I take a look at the Dallas Cowboys, who have probably been one of the perfect examples of just prioritizing that piece of their team. And while it's not the most sexiest pieces when it comes to appealing to the crowd, it's probably the most important piece on the field. I mean, I remember all of those Cowboys teams that competed and went out and got playoff spots. It's because they had 4 out of their 5 guys on that offensive line were all pro level guys, like Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick. They had Zach Martin on there. Lyle Collins was really solid at left guard for a little bit. Right tackle, I don't remember who they technically had at right tackle. And then even now, how they're filling in with, having an offensive line of virtually all Tylers, Tyler Booker, Tyler Smith, and whatnot, who they just re-signed to a brand new contract. That alone is proving big time for them. The Denver Broncos right now, last year they were incredible offensively, just purely because of their offensive line. And yes, the running game wasn't getting going because they didn't have suitable talent at the running back position, but they were able to keep Bo Nix protected and allow him to throw balls down the field. And as we know, the Cincinnati Bengals have been historically one of the cheapest franchises in the league. They have not been willing to go out and spend big-time money, both on their superstars and to support their superstars. And that is the reason why this is now Joe Burrow's 5th year, and I think that he has missed a solid proportion of 4 out of his 5 seasons. I think that he has realistically only had 1 full season, and I believe that was their Super Bowl year when they were actually able to protect him for a little bit. I'm going to look at this right now. I'm going to be scrolling around and looking up stats whenever I can just so that I can be a little bit more accurate. But taking a look at NFL career stats, missed 7 games in his rookie season, then hit back-to-back 16 games in 2021 and 2022, which is where they found their most success. Then missed 7 games in 2023. Last year actually played a full season, but I believe had some nagging injuries here and there as well, and now is going to be out for 8 to 10 games potentially throughout this season. And so, I've heard Cincinnati fans and Cincinnati management, and it's this kind of, just nagging question of why can't we just get past the hump, right? Why can't we just get through? And it's simply based on the fact that they're not willing to pay enough for an offensive line. They're not even willing to go out and draft offensive linemen for Joe Burrow to put those guys into place. I think that the only guy that they have drafted for him, I believe, was Amarius Mims. I believe the Bengals drafted. That's the only big-time piece that they have really gone for him. And, the defensive side of the ball could definitely improve. We've harped so much on that secondary and how vulnerable it can be. And it did prove to be vulnerable yesterday against the Minnesota Vikings. We had Carson Wentz throwing for nearly 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, and especially going up against a very talented wide receiver room that Minnesota has. Justin Jefferson alone, blows out anything on that secondary. That definitely is a big-time need, but at the end of the day, you have to keep your quarterback healthy. You have to keep him in the game, and had that been Joe Burrow in there, I don't think that there would have been as many mental mistakes as they would have had, and they would have competed in that game. And unfortunately, this is a Bengals team that if they're not able to recover from this big-time blowout, they're not going to end up realistically making the playoffs, to be honest. In all honesty, they are probably not going to make the playoffs if they're not going to be able to recover from this loss. And it shows to be very difficult. Jake Browning has shown some promise, and he has shown that he can be suitable in that spots, but they're going to have to protect them, and they're going to have to do a lot better job at hanging on to the ball. Then we shift over to a little bit of AFC South ball throughout the league with the Texans and Jaguars, and then you also have the Colts and the Titans. I'm going to speak about both of these games really quick, starting with Jaguars versus Texans. And I want to start, first of all, with the Jacksonville Jaguars because I think that it's really, really beginning to become time to begin to put a big-time warning sign on Trevor Lawrence. I'm really, really starting to get worried about where he really is as a quarterback. And it's not just, necessarily about his turnover problems. It's the fact that I haven't necessarily seen an improvement from him since his rookie year. He had that one good year. I believe it was the second year in the league when they ended up pulling off that comeback against the LA Chargers in that first-round playoff series. But that was really it for him. Honestly, that's all that we have seen. And, have the Jags been a perfectly suitable position for him? No, not necessarily. The start of his career with Urban Meyer was definitely an awful way to start it off. But, I think that Doug Peterson was suitable. I think that Liam Cohen has shown himself suitable enough to be able to coach up different quarterbacks, and the way that he was able to take over for Dave Canales in coaching Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, who we'll get to in just a little bit. I think that he has shown provable to that, and I also don't think that he has had necessarily some bad weapons. They had that year where they equipped him with guys like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. They drafted Brian Thomas Jr. They drafted Travis Hunter to bring in and to be able to help him. And sure, that's not all-star level talent as of right now, although BTJ is pretty much as good as it could get for a number one wide receiver, but he just continues to turn over the ball. He continues to look very, very unconfident with the way that he is launching this. And the run game even has kind of been there. Etienne has been improving a little bit. Yeah, 56 yards yesterday. Bashael Tutin has been incredible as a backup running back with the speed that he brings to the table. Both of them ended up running for a touchdown. But, it just doesn't seem like he could get into much of a rhythm. And as for Travis Hunter, I really think that the Jags at this point need to beginning to start to commit to a side for him. I understand that they wanted to, try things out and try to play him on both sides of the ball because that is where he was primarily a playmaker in college. But I think overall it's just seeming to be too much of him, and he's not getting enough time on either side to really make much of an impact. I mean, yesterday on offense, he had one reception for 21 yards. And then I think he played majority of the rest of the half of the game on defense. I think that they need to pick a side for him, and I think that that is 100% cornerback. Not only do I think that that's a position that they could really find need, especially to potentially get some turnovers off of to create more opportunity for that offense, but I also think that that is where his main talent has been really, all his career. I think that we've seen him make his biggest plays at the cornerback position. Being able to just read the mind of the quarterback, being able to back off a couple of steps, being able to come back and recover and just make a diving interception, being able to force fumbles, make secure tackles. Sure, he gets burnt a couple of times down the field like we saw in college, but really it's far few and in between. They need to pick a side for him, and I think that cornerback is the right move. And as for the Houston Texans, again, a very, very disappointing start for a team that I think is just so talented, and it's so frustrating to me because they have so many great weapons on the offensive side of the ball as well. And their offensive line hasn't even necessarily been terrible. It hasn't been great, but I don't think that it's been terrible, especially on that where it was supposed to be soft within the interior at the guard spot. It hasn't been, very bad at all. And, I do understand that the loss of Tank Dell was definitely a big one, that he has a lot of speed, which makes him very dynamic and is able to get him into the backfield. But my thing is that they have weapons to replace Tank Dell. That's really the big thing here is that they drafted Jalen Noel. They drafted Jaden Higgins. They drafted the duo from Iowa State, both guys who showed, some ability with their speed to be able to get behind the defense and being able to be vertical deep threats across the line of scrimmage. They've shown that prowess, and unfortunately, because of them firing Bobby Sloak and having their new offensive coordinator, who I cannot remember his name at the moment in time, they have not taken advantage of that. Nick Caley, I apologize. Having Nick Caley come in and coach up this offense, it's just not as dynamic as it used to be, man. They're seeming like they're much more vertical on their line. Stroud doesn't seem confident in it whatsoever, which I've still seen flashes from him to be able to be a solid talent. And we know how good he can be. We saw him in that rookie year and how he was able to execute. And I think as bad as Sloak was at sometimes, as bad as he was putting them in terms of, certain situations and maybe making it close to the line of scrimmage when it comes to the play clock, I think that overall he was much more confident in his weapons than what's his name again? Oh my gosh, I can't even remember. Nick Caley has ever been amid this 0-3 start. And I think that he is really the big reason to point to for this slow start because it ain't going to be D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico Ryans ain't in charge of this offense. It is going to be Nick Caley. So he needs to really pull this team together, and he needs to start using his weapons. He needs to start using that speed. He needs to start getting receivers moving horizontally throughout midfield and being able to use some crossing routes to be able to confuse the defense and get guys open. He needs to start executing the run a little bit better. They need to start running the ball a lot better. Nick Chubb was their leading rusher yesterday, 9 carries for 38 yards. They need to find somebody who is going to be able to execute. I'm not sure if it's the rookie Jacavius Marks in the backfield that maybe needs to get a little bit more carries. Woody Marks from USC, I believe, but they need to give somebody more opportunities. They can't be having these split carries. They need to pick a running back and they need to go forward with them. And they need to figure out very, 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 very quickly because they're slowly beginning to lose ground. And what is still a pretty weak AFC South. Like when you look at this, the only big-time competitor within the AFC South is the Indianapolis Colts, who we get to now, who are now 3-0. and had an impressive 41-20 win over the Tennessee Titans yesterday. And can I just say something? Daniel Jones looks like the absolute truth right now. I mean, oh my goodness. I have to say negative things about him when he's playing bad, but oh my goodness, do I have to praise him when he's playing great. 18 for 25 yesterday, 228 yards on the day. One total touchdown for him overall. He moves into 3-0. But not only that, they have only punted once this year in 3 full games. And that was yesterday. The Titans were finally able to force them to their first punt. And this, again, with Daniel Jones, I think really, really preaches the idea of the situation matters, right? Where you are at really, really matters. Now, that's not to say that Brian Daboll in New York was a terrible play caller and that he wasn't going to be able to do anything with Daniel Jones, because they did have a successful season behind Daniel Jones in one season. But it is very clear that Shane Steichen knows how to use the multitude of weapons that he has on this team. We talked about this Colts team and how talented they are across the board offensively. Tyler Warren, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, and whatnot. We are seeing that. And Jones is doing a really, really great job at dispersing the wealth all throughout this receiving core. Pittman with 6 receptions, Alec Pierce with 4, Tyler Warren with 3, Josh Downs with 2, Jonathan Taylor with 3 receptions on the day. Pittman got a touchdown, and there's been different people scoring the touchdown. That's not even counting Adonai Mitchell, who didn't even get a target yesterday for the Indianapolis Colts. It's been a very, very impressive work for Daniel Jones, and he's showing a little bit of those dual threat abilities as well, running for 27 yards. But I think that it also shows not nearly just the situation, not nearly just the coaching that you have, but again, how much the running game really, really does matter. Jonathan Taylor, 3 touchdowns yesterday for 102 yards off of 17 carries. That is really what aided them and allows so much opening for Daniel Jones, because teams are so focused on the run. I saw with my Denver Broncos a week ago, they were having such a difficult time stopping the run. They had to begin to start sending blitzes, which left their cornerbacks vulnerable on the backside, being one-on-one and man-to-man coverage. And, with these speedy receivers, with a guy like Alec Pierce, with a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., they're able to burn past these cornerbacks and be able to get past the secondary and be able to make some big-time plays. And that's what we're really seeing for Daniel Jones. So the question is, can he continue this? I mean, hey, he did it against a really, really solid defense in the Denver Broncos, like I mentioned. He did it against the Titans, who I think have a really solid pass rush overall. He did it against the Miami Dolphins, which, not the greatest defense, hasn't had the greatest history of having some defense. But Rams next week, that's the potential. Raiders, Cardinals, Chargers, so Steelers, who are supposed to have a little bit of formidable defense. So he's going to begin to go through and hit some harder teams, but a lot of very, very winnable games for the Colts this season. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go over the 10-win mark and potentially clinch a playoff spot. And I think that they are absolutely within the driver's seat right now to go out and win that division. A couple of highlights that I didn't watch very, very closely just because I was either focused on other games or I was watching the Bronco game. You had the Commanders routing the Raiders 41-24. Marcus Mariota filling in for that game for the injured Jaden Daniels. Eagles winning on a blocked kick against the LA Rams, I believe that they did. Eagles just continued to make big-time plays in the clutch, and Jalen Hurts showed off a little bit more of his arm. Falcons losing 30-0 against the Carolina Panthers. That was probably my surprise of the week right there. Panthers definitely came out to play, and Bryce Young hoping that this really begins to put him into motion for some confidence, because but prior to this game, he looked very, very similar to how he did in his first 2 years in the league, in the lead up to him getting benched in favor of Andy Dalton. You had Steelers 21-14 over the New England Patriots. Honestly, Aaron Rodgers did not play well whatsoever. I just think that Drake May made a lot of big-time mistakes, and that's some of the growing pains that you're going to go through with a young quarterback for the New England Patriots. But if he can get things together, that offense had just so many scoring opportunities, and the defense looked great. Robert Spillane, I believe, had an interception in that game, so a lot of their signings are being able to pay off. You had Browns upsetting the Packers 13-10. Again, Jordan Love not with his best performance, and for the Packers, that's a really, really tough one to swallow, especially because you have been some good teams within the previous 2 weeks. Bucks over the Jets 29-27. The Jets, despite being in the position that they're in, I apologize, I just pressed on the Steelers-Patriots game, but they now sit at 0-3. But I actually think that they've looked solid, throughout 3 weeks, and they've been, outside of, I believe, last week's game against the Buffalo Bills, where they got beat 30-10, and their offense really couldn't get much moving. But in both week 1 and week 3, their offense has definitely shown some potential. And I definitely think that new head coach Aaron Glenn has definitely brought a lot of oomph and a lot of big time energy into that Jets offense. I mean, with a rookie quarterback, with a backup quarterback in Tyrod Taylor, he was able to go off for 2 touchdowns and an interception. Garrett Wilson looked big time involved. If you go to the 4 sacks being there for the New York Jets, just some efficiency issues with them on certain downs and a little bit of undisciplined ball with the penalties. But Baker Mayfield, man, continues to play out of his mind. He, in my opinion, is the most underrated quarterback within the NFL right now. Yesterday, he went 19 for 29, 233 yards and a touchdown. And just in big-time moments, he continues to show up. I think he is, without a doubt, a top 10 quarterback. And I think that you could potentially even put him, in that 6 to 8 range amongst them. You had the Seahawks routing the Saints 44-13. That one, not a really big-time surprise. The Saints just aren't very good. 49ers and Cardinals played to a very, very close contest, 16-15, San Francisco over Arizona. A tough pill to swallow for San Francisco, as they did lose Nick Bosa to a torn ACL, as it was announced today. You have the Chicago Bears 31-14 over the Cowboys. Bears looked really, really good. Finally, that offense is finally beginning to start to execute, so hopefully that puts them in motion. Caleb finally had a really, really solid game for himself, and they finally were able to get some of their young rookies involved. Luther Burden with a big-time touchdown off of a flea flicker. And for the Cowboys, another big-time winnable game against a winnable opponent definitely hurts to swallow. And then 22-9 for the Chiefs over the Giants last night for Sunday Night Football. The Chiefs continuing to struggle, especially against a poor team in the Giants. I think Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen might be fired soon. And I hate to say that. I'm not trying to sound mean, but they have not performed well to start the season. And I think that they need to really, really consider looking at Jackson Dart to potentially come in and start turning the tide. Quick drink of water real quick. And the reason why I took that sip of water is not just because my throat is dry and we have a lot to talk about, but because we are talking about the most important issue of this video. And that is my favorite team, the Denver Broncos, who unfortunately lost in another heartbreaker yesterday against the Los Angeles Chargers, 23-20. Broncos fans, if you're watching this, when will the pain end? When will the day come that we can finally begin to win close games? I'm telling you, between last year and this year, I think we're like 1-8. When it comes to one possession games. It seems like we're either losing by 3 or losing by 7, or we're just blowing out the competition by like 20 plus points. Like there's no in between. That's the two situations here for the Denver Broncos. And it's just so frustrating because the team, I think, actually looked great yesterday. Like, I have seen a lot of TikToks, obviously week 1. Let's back up here a little bit. Week 1, the offense looked terrible. The defense looked dominant. Week 2, the offense actually looked pretty good and the defense got exposed. I actually think that yesterday, overall, they played a virtually pretty complete game. I mean, yes, there are some big-time mistakes and big-time plays that you can pick out, but I think almost certainly that they did okay to be in that game yesterday, and they almost did enough, to go ahead and win that game, but almost is not enough. And so to get into the full breakdown of what really happened yesterday for the Denver Broncos, I want to break this down in each individual section. Offense, defense, and special teams, because I think not only does each side of the ball need to be examined, I think that each coach need to be examined, because I think at the end of the day, this is almost certainly a coaching issue for the Denver Broncos, and it's not even really a discussion. Let's start on special teams first off. Since Darren Rizzi has been hired as the special teams coordinator for the Denver Broncos, and I believe this is his first year with us, we've looked like shit. We've looked like absolute shit. And that comes from a year last year where we actually looked pretty solid in the special teams area. I mean, we weren't, getting a touchdown after every punt or whatnot, but Marvin Mims looked like a pretty confident and competent returner. He had a fumble last week. And yes, it is only one fumble. I understand. And it is only week 3. But that is something that we never saw from Denver last year. They're having a lot of difficulty containing runners when they are punting. The Gunners are not doing an efficient job at being able to contain the punt returner. We had an offsides call on special teams yesterday, which was just absolutely deflating as a fan to see. Nick Bonito is on special teams, and half of his damn body is over the neutral zone, is over the line of scrimmage. What the heck are we doing? First of all, with Nick Bonito, you got to have more play awareness on that and be able to realize, how freaking far you were off sides. But also on Darren Rizzi, that's a coaching issue. And that's something that, could potentially be becoming a bad habit within practice, getting lazy and whatnot. And that turns a 3-and-out to bringing a tired defense back onto the field and having them having to get another stop, which I believe they did not on that drive. I think that ended in a field goal for the LA Chargers. So special teams has looked terrible. Defensively, last week we looked awful. This week it was a lot better, I got to admit. Despite us giving up 23 points, we were able to force a turnover off of Justin Herbert with one interception. We were able to cause a couple of punts, a couple of 3-and-outs, which I was very happy with. We were a little bit better on the run. We weren't as great stopping the run still as we were last year. Marion Hampton still went off for 70 yards and a touchdown, but we were a little bit better. We are getting to the quarterback efficiency, which I love. Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, DJ Jones, they're all doing a fabulous, fabulous job. And Vance Joseph continued to put pressure on the quarterback. Please, I'm loving it. But the main issues is coming in, not the front seven, but what I'm going to start calling the back seven. That secondary and that linebacking core is consistently messing up. Starting with the inside linebacking core, they're one of the big-time reasons why we're not being able to stop the run right now. We desperately do need Dre Greenlaw within that lineup to be able to stuff the inside zone runs, and it's just not happening. And they're okay in coverage sometimes, especially Justin Chenard on the tight ends. I do have to agree, but I think that Alex Singleton is actually fighting through a little bit too much. I didn't know that he was actually fighting through a big-time hand injury where he has a big cast, and, obviously coming back off of the ACL. I think that it might just be too much for him. And then to get to the secondary, man, I have to make this loud and clear. I absolutely love Riley Moss as a cornerback. I thought that pre-injury last year, he was doing a phenomenal job, especially within man-to-man coverage. He was sticking to his man like glue, and he was making amazing deflections almost every single time that they targeted him. And he was, in my opinion, one of the best number 2 cornerbacks in the league. But the man, since he has came back from injury last year, I thought that it was him just getting back into the groove and potentially having some conditioning issues from him sitting out a lot. But he has been getting exposed off of the line of scrimmage in man-to-man coverage. And unfortunately, we want to talk about bad habits. One of the bad habits that he has is as soon as he gets blown by, his, first instinct is to automatically just hold every single jersey that he could find, and it leads to holding calls and pass interferences time and time and time again. Patrick Surtain, same thing, really didn't do a really great job of staying on wide receivers yesterday either. And the Chargers offense notoriously has one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the league. Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, who just, a year or two ago was one of the guys that was the meme of the league, who was dropping almost every single pass that Justin Herbert delivered to him. And he looked like an all-pro out there yesterday and last game. And not to even mention that, but to also put in perspective that that's just on man-to-man coverage. When you put these guys into zone, they look lost. I don't know if it's a communication issue or whatnot with the safeties, but even before the play, I can see, Pastor Tan and Talanoa Hufanga pointing at each other back and forth, bantering and whatnot, just trying to figure out where to go, all the way up until the ball is snapped. There just seems to be a lot of big-time confusion out there. And one of the things that I have been harping on with Sean Payton, especially so far within these first three weeks, is where are the rookies? Not just where are the rookies, where is the adjustment? Where is the substitution? We talk about Riley Moss and him getting beat off of the line of scrimmage and man-to-man coverage. Where is Chris Abrams-Durain? I mean, Chris Abrams-Durain, this is a guy that last year when both Surtain and Riley Moss were out with injury, had to plug in immediately into a starting cornerback slot and looked great. Had an interception against the LA Chargers in LA and did a really, really great job at being able to cover. And, since then has gotten little to no looks from Sean Payton. And Sean Payton drafted a cornerback to fill in that role. A cornerback in Jahdae Barron, who, by the way, we have not seen nearly enough of. And I'm not sure if that's him not looking ready within practice, because I'm not looking at every single practice, but he is not getting nearly enough opportunity. And this is a guy on Texas who was not only very versatile, being able to play both safety and cornerback, but was also a big-time playmaker, could force a lot of huge turnovers for you. And turnovers is something that they need right now, especially when they're getting blown up on big-time plays down the field. Why not try out Jahdae Barron on the boundary? I understand that he's a little bit smaller, but why not try him out there for a couple of plays? Sub him in for Riley Moss when Riley Moss is getting tired. Why not try out Chris Abrams-Durain on the boundary? Like, eventually, when is the adjustment going to come? You want to talk about rookies? I haven't seen enough about R.J. Harvey. We can move on to the offensive side of the ball, where I have not seen nearly enough of R.J. Harvey within the running game. He had Sean Payton put him in for the first 2 plays, I believe, where he gave him a run play, an outside zone run, and then there was also a short screen pass. I haven't seen him nearly enough outside of those 2 plays. I don't think that he even really came back into the game following that. Pat Bryant, who is supposed to be, this big-time vertical threat going down the field, who Sean Payton hyped up as a guy who we could see as the next Michael Thomas, I haven't seen him at all either. And this is important because the Broncos made moves to put these guys in positions to be able to play. They traded Devon Bailey over to the New Orleans Saints to give guys like Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims Jr. and Pat Bryant some ability to play. He said that he was going to put R.J. Harvey in positions to make big-time plays. He said that Jahdae Barron was going to be a very big-time and crucial part of that defense. And yet, when the defense is struggling in the secondary role, when the running game, especially within that first half, was absolutely awful, he does nothing to switch anything up. And I want to preference this. I love Sean Payton, and I love the job that he's done, and I really, really do believe that he has set the right culture within Denver. But the guy, especially to start the season, just starts so slow, and it's so frustrating. I just looked it up the other day, he is under 500 in the month of September. And we were in the same position last year. I think we started 1-2 last year to start the year. I think the previous year before that, with his first year with Russ, we started out 0-3. And yes, he begins to find his footing within October. But when you are a Hall of Fame, a veteran Hall of Fame coach, guaranteed Hall of Fame coach in this league, at some point you would think that he would find certain play styles, certain plays, or certain game plans that would be guaranteed to work in the month of September. And yet it just seems like he's kind of all over the place, trying out different things. In Game 1 against the Tennessee Titans, he has Bo Nix rolling out to his left on his weak side, throwing across his body. He's trying out flea flickers and play actions, and he can't focus on one thing that he can 100% make work. And as for Bo Nix, I understand that there is a lot of hate on him right now, especially yesterday when he had a couple of big-time overthrows that could have led to big-time scores. But I don't really blame Bo. I mean, Game 1, he didn't look good whatsoever. Game 2, I thought he looked phenomenal outside of that game-ending interception that he threw. I think that he looked great in Game 2. And yesterday, I think that he looked fine as well. 14 for 25, 153 yards for a touchdown. I think in the second half, you saw him get a lot more comfortable and confident, especially with being able to run around in the pocket and be able to find his footing. But the one thing that I will say about Bo Nix, and I got to be honest, a lot of his overthrows weren't even that bad. If you really look at the tape, a couple of those were pretty catchable. I think that Marvin Mims just needs to run a little bit harder and be able to catch up to that ball. Those balls are catchable. But the big thing for Bo going forward is he needs to start setting his feet. That is the big thing in all of these, especially in all of the overthrows that he is having. He is so frantic and trying his best to survey the pocket and get in and out. And what he ends up doing is he ends up throwing himself into an offensive lineman who is blocking a defender and is throwing these like jump passes 50 yards into the air, when in reality, all he has to do is take one step forward, plant his feet, and step in and launch. And had he done that, he would be throwing absolute darts down the field, big-time accurate throws, and it would look a lot better. And some of that could be to confidence. Some of that could be for him not being very comfortable, which I do understand, because I do think that the offensive line pass protection this year has not been as nearly as good as it was last year. The offensive line has kind of been letting me down, letting in a ton of pressure. But he needs to relax a little bit more. He needs to just step into his throws and set his feet, because when he does that, he throws he throws the ball very well. He throws it very well. And, the Broncos, there is some difficult games ahead, but there's also a lot of winnable games, in my opinion. You have the Bengals next week. That's Jake Browning. They just got blown out by 38. That's at home. You're hoping that that's a win. Then you have to go on the road against the defending Super Bowl champions, the Eagles. I'm not going to lie. That's probably a loss. I don't think that we're there yet. Unless the defense plays absolutely lights out and Bo can score a couple of touchdowns. But then you go Jets, Giants, Cowboys, Texans. I think, at least 3 out of those 4 games are winnable. I think that Jets, Broncos, Texans are definitely winnable. Cowboys, especially with how susceptible their defenses looked, could be a winnable game. Raiders, Chiefs, neither of those teams have looked good to start out the season. Commanders after that, especially if Jaden Daniels is nagging with an injury. You then have Raiders after that. Packers, that's probably a loss. But then Jaguars at home. So, I think the important thing is that as Denver Broncos fans, we do not need to freak out right now. This is not a freak out moment for this team because Sean Payton does get better throughout the season. And there are so many more winnable games on the schedule. And I do think that this team will still inevitably end up making the playoffs. But when you're talking about Super Bowl, if you're Sean Payton throwing out the Super Bowl word and you're out here starting 1-2 in September and you're having so many bad habits, 10 penalties for 70 yards. We didn't even get to the penalty side of it, which was basically what I believe really blew them the game, were just these bad habits of having big-time offsides calls, Sean Payton having to sub late and getting a bunch of delay of games or having to shred away all of his timeouts, a couple of pass interferences, just overall, just undisciplined bad habits from the Denver Broncos, which comes down to coaching. That is what lost them the game yesterday, and that is why in a situation where they could be 3-0, remember last week against the Colts, they had that big-time flag call on the game-winning field goal that Indianapolis ended up missing. Undisciplined football is why the Denver Broncos look the way that they do right now, and that inevitably they could be 3-0, but that is the reason why they are not. And I think that the coaching needs to be looked at under a big-time microscope, from Sean Payton to Joe Lombardi, who is one of the offensive play callers. I've heard a lot of people calling for Davis Webb to start calling the plays because he is our passing game coordinator, and Bo Nix seems to hype him up a lot and be very, very close with him, and especially Darren Rizzi on special teams. He needs to do better, or he needs to be replaced quick, because the talent that this team has definitely should be better. And speaking on the talent so far, what I feared with this Denver Broncos free agent class, and I don't mean to rant any longer about this, I'm going to try to shorten this up. But what I feared about this Denver Broncos free agent class is coming into fruition. The injuries are beginning to pile up. Hufanga has stayed healthy. JK has stayed healthy. And both of those guys have been big-time players. But Evan Ingram not playing yesterday was a big-time hole for us. The tight ends were not producing. And Sean Payton hasn't even really been using Evan Ingram a lot, who was supposed to be his joker player. And Dre Greenlaw not being in that inside linebacker role to help us stuff the run has been a big-time hole for us too. So, it was a risk that the Broncos took to bring in some very, very talented but very injury-prone players. I'm hoping that we can get those guys back. We hopefully get Evan Ingram back next week. We get Dre Greenlaw in 3 weeks following this. And hopefully once they're back, maybe that'll transform some of the issues that they are having. But ultimately, it comes up to undisciplined ball. And I think that Sean Payton needs to pivot. He needs to shift some of his players around. He needs to start getting other players a chance. And I also think that they do need to begin to particularly start looking at their draft strategy, especially within last year's draft class. Don't get me wrong, Jahdae Barron, RJ Harvey, I think that they will inevitably be okay. But I think that there was a lot more opportunity to get a really, really talented wide receiver, a different kind of running back, somebody who brings potentially more power, like a Devin Neal out of Kansas last year, or even like a Bashan Tutin, who brings a lot of speed to the table and could break out for some big-time plays. I think that they really need to evaluate what happened with that draft class this past season and really see what they want to do with it going forward. But ultimately, that is all that I have for you guys today. Let me know if I missed anything down below in the comments, and also let me know your thoughts about all of this. Inevitably, I try to keep these videos as short as I can. This video looks like it's going to run just over 40 minutes. So I apologize for a little bit of a longer video, but there's just so much content to cover within this week breakdown. So let me know what I missed down below. Let me know what you also would like me to talk about and your thoughts on all of these, as well as subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing with your friends. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those ads are going to be down below. We're on all those social medias. You'll get to see my latest reaction to breaking news from the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports. And you will never miss whenever the podcast decides to upload an episode. And without further ado, guys, I think that is all from me today. I'm going to go drink some water and take a nap and get ready for this big time Monday Night Football matchup between the Lions and the Ravens. I hope that you guys enjoy it, and I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.